Last night, Fox News erupted as Howard Stern unleashed a vicious attack on Trump and his press secretary, Karoline Leavitt. The 27-year-old faced the radio legend in a clash that left the studio crackling with hostility, setting social media ablaze. The tension was palpable as the cameras rolled in the brightly lit Fox News studio, the air thick with anticipation. Host Sean Hannity introduced the segment with a smirk, knowing the matchup between Karoline Leavitt, the youngest white House press secretary in history, and Howard Stern, the provocative radio icon, was a powder keg waiting to ignite. The audience, both in the studio and at home, leaned in, sensing a confrontation that would dominate headlines. Leavitt, poised in a sharp navy blazer, sat with a steely gaze, her youthful face betraying none of the pressure she faced. From her, Stern slouched in his chair, his trademark glasses glinting under the studio lights, a sneer already forming. Hannity barely finished his opening question about Trump's leadership when Stern pounced. "Let's cut the nonsense," he growled, his voice dripping with disdain. "Trump's a fraud, a man who's turned his marriage into a circus for headlines. He parades Melania like a trophy, but everyone knows it's a sham, a cold business deal to prop up his ego. The man's incapable of loyalty, and you, Karoline, you're just a kid playing dress-up, parroting his lies to the American people." The studio gasped. The audience split between murmurs of agreement and sharp boos. Stern leaned forward, his eyes locked on Leavitt, relishing the chaos he'd unleashed. Leavitt's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening as Stern's words hung in the air. Hannity tried to steer the conversation, but Stern barreled on, his voice rising. "You're nothing but a puppet, Karoline, a 27-year-old, with no real power, just a mouthpiece for a man who'd throw you under the bus the second it suits him. You think you're relevant? You're a prop, a shiny toy for Trump's propaganda machine." The attack was personal, designed to humiliate, to reduce her to a footnote in Trump's orbit. The studio lights seemed to burn hotter, the atmosphere electric with hostility. Leavitt's eyes flashed with fury, but she held her composure, letting Stern's tirade run its course. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, controlled, but laced with an edge that silenced the room. "Mr. Stern, you're wrong, and your hatred for President Trump has blinded you to reality. I'm not here as a puppet. I'm here as a voice for millions of Americans who believe in his vision, a vision you've never bothered to understand." The audience erupted in applause, conservative viewers at home no doubt cheering her defiance. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "You attack his marriage, his character, but what about yours? You sit there, throwing stones from your glass house, pretending your outrage is principle. It's not. It's just noise." Stern's smirk faltered, his face reddening as Leavitt's words landed. Hannity, sensing blood in the water, pressed Leavitt to elaborate, but Stern interrupted, his voice booming. "Don't lecture me, kid. I've been calling out hypocrites like Trump for decades. You're out of your depth." The exchange was a verbal cage match, each jab escalating the stakes. Leavitt didn't back down, her voice rising to match his. "You call me a kid, but I'm the one standing up for what I believe in, not hiding behind a microphone, spewing venom for ratings." The crowd roared, split between those cheering her audacity and others stunned by her refusal to yield. The debate spiraled, accusations flying like shrapnel. Stern doubled down, mocking Leavitt's loyalty to Trump, questioning her credentials, her motives. Leavitt countered with precision, dismantling his assumptions, tying her defense of Trump to a broader narrative of American resilience. The studio was a battlefield, Hannity barely able to keep order as the two traded blows. Stern's anger was palpable, his usual cool demeanor cracking under Leavitt's relentless pushback. Her youth, once a target for his scorn, was becoming her strength, her clarity cutting through his bluster. As the segment neared its close, Leavitt landed a final blow. You can scream all you want, Howard, but the American people see through your act. They know who's fighting for them, and it's not you. The audience exploded, the sound drowning out Stern's attempt at a retort. His face was a mask of fury, his hands slamming the table as he struggled to regain control. Leavitt sat back, her expression calm but triumphant, the studio buzzing with the weight of what had just unfolded. Stern's eyes darted to Hannity, then to the cameras, his composure hanging by a thread as the segment cut to a break, the confrontation far from over. The Fox News stage pulsed with raw energy as the commercial break ended, cameras zooming in on a seething Howard Stern. His earlier bravado was fraying, replaced by a barely contained rage that made the air feel combustible. Karoline Leavitt, undeterred, sat with a quiet intensity, her eyes locked on Stern like a prosecutor ready to deliver a closing argument. Sean Hannity, sensing the moment's volatility, leaned forward, his voice sharp. "We're back, and things are heated. Howard, you've had your say. Karoline just called you out. What's your response?" The audience held its breath, the weight of Leavitt's last strike still reverberating. Stern's lips curled into a sneer, his voice low but venomous. "You think you're clever, don't you, Karoline? Throwing out sound bites for the MAGA crowd to lap up. But let's get real. You're a nobody, a glorified intern who got lucky because Trump needed a fresh face to sell his garbage. You're not fighting for America. You're fighting for a man who'd sell this country out for a golf course deal." The crowd gasped, some jeering, others cheering, the divide in the room stark. Stern's words were a calculated gut punch, meant to strip Leavitt of her authority, to paint her as a naive pawn in Trump's game. Leavitt's face flushed, but her voice remained steady, cutting through the noise. "You're wrong again, Howard. I'm here because I believe in a vision for this country, one you've spent your career mocking. You call me a nobody? I'm a voice for the people you've dismissed, the ones you think are too dumb to see through your shtick." The audience roared, her defiance igniting a wave of applause. She leaned forward, her tone sharpening. "And let's talk about selling out. You've built a fortune tearing people down, hiding behind free speech, while peddling cynicism. Who's the real opportunist here?" The jab landed hard, Stern's eyes narrowing as the crowd's cheers grew louder. Stern slammed his hand on the table, his voice rising to a shout. "Don't you dare compare your little press briefings to what I've done. I've exposed frauds like Trump for years, and you're just his latest shield, a kid who thinks she's tough because she's got a podium and a script." His words were laced with contempt, but there was a tremor in his voice, a crack in his armor. Leavitt's refusal to crumble was getting under his skin, her youth and poise turning his attacks into fuel for her fire. Hannity tried to interject, but Stern waved him off, his focus locked on Leavitt. "You're out here defending a man whose own wife can't stand him. Melania's checked out, and everyone knows it. Why don't you admit Trump's a sinking ship?" Leavitt's eyes blazed, her response swift and surgical. "You're obsessed with tearing down President Trump, but you've got nothing but gossip and spite. Melania stands by him, just like millions of Americans do, because they see what you refuse to, a leader who fights for them. You want to talk about sinking? Look at your own relevance, Howard. You're screaming into a void, and you know it." The studio erupted, the applause deafening as Stern's face twisted with fury. Her words weren't just a defense of Trump. They were a direct challenge to Stern's legacy, a claim that his influence was fading while her star was rising. The confrontation escalated, each exchange a verbal landmine. Stern leaned into his attack, mocking Leavitt's age and inexperience, calling her Trump's cheerleader, and questioning her grasp of policy. "You can't even spell diplomacy, let alone understand it," he sneered, drawing scattered laughs from his supporters in the crowd. But Leavitt was ready, countering with a blistering takedown of Stern's own contradictions. "You talk about policy, but all you've got is shock value. I deal in facts, Howard, while you're still trying to be the bad boy of radio in your 60s. The crowd roared again, her precision exposing the age gap not as a weakness, but as a generational shift. Hannity, barely able to keep up, threw in a question about media bias, hoping to pivot, but the two combatants ignored him, locked in their own war. Stern's anger was boiling over, his usual wit replaced by raw frustration, as Leavitt matched him, blow for blow. "You're nothing without Trump's name," he spat, his voice hoarse. Leavitt fired back, "And you're nothing without an audience to shock. Who's the real puppet, Howard?" The studio was chaos. The audience split, some chanting Leavitt's name, others booing Stern's relentless attacks. The tension was unbearable, Stern's composure unraveling as Leavitt's confidence grew. Her every word a reminder that she wasn't just holding her own. She was gaining ground. As the segment hurtled toward its end, Stern's frustration peaked, his voice cracking as he pointed at Leavitt. "You think you're winning this? You're a flash in the pan, and Trump's dragging you down with him." Leavitt didn't blink, her final words a dagger. "Keep talking, Howard. The more you do, the more people see who's really scared here." The crowd exploded, Stern's face a mask of shock and rage as he gripped the table, his eyes burning with the realization that Leavitt wasn't just surviving his onslaught, she was turning it against him, and the world was watching. The Fox news set was a pressure cooker, the air crackling as the audience's roar faded into a tense hush. Howard Stern's knuckles were white, his grip on the table betraying the storm brewing inside him. Karoline Leavitt sat opposite, her posture unshaken, her eyes glinting with the confidence of someone who knew she'd drawn blood. Sean Hannity, his voice taut, seized the moment to fan the flames. "Karoline, Howard just called you a flash in the pan. He says Trump's your downfall. What do you say to that?" The cameras tightened on Leavitt, the world waiting for her next move in a clash that was rewriting the night's narrative. Leavitt's lips curved into a faint, defiant smile. "Howard, you're so desperate to tear me down, you're recycling insults. A flash in the pan? That's rich coming from someone whose relevance peaked when I was in diapers." The audience erupted, laughter mixing with cheers as Stern's face darkened. Her words were a scalpel, slicing through his bravado with surgical precision. "I'm not here to be a footnote. I'm here to represent Americans who are sick of your elitist rants, who see through your tired act of playing rebel while cozying up to the same system you claim to hate." The crowd roared, her voice rising above the chaos, each syllable a challenge to Stern's crumbling authority. Stern's eyes flashed with fury, his voice a low growl as he leaned forward. "You're delusional, Karoline. You think you're some patriot? You're a prop, a shiny distraction for Trump's circus. He's using you, and when he's done, you'll be tossed aside like yesterday's news." The attack was vicious, meant to wound, to paint her as a naive dreamer blind to Trump's machinations. The studio split, boos clashing with applause, as Hannity watched, barely concealing his glee at the escalating war. Stern's words hung heavy, but Leavitt didn't waver, her gaze locked on him like a predator sizing up its prey. "You want to talk about being used, Howard?" Leavitt shot back, her tone icy. "Look at yourself. You've spent decades chasing shock value, begging for attention while pretending it's principle. You're not a rebel. You're a brand, and a fading one at that. I stand for something real, for people who want a future, not your recycled cynicism." The audience exploded, her words igniting a firestorm of support. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a searing whisper. "And as for Trump, he's fighting battles you'd never have the guts to face. You'd rather snipe from a studio than stand for anything." The crowd was on its feet, the energy seismic as Stern's jaw clenched, his composure unraveling. Stern slammed his fist on the table, his voice booming. "Don't lecture me about guts, kid. I've taken risks you can't even dream of. You're a mouthpiece, nothing more, parroting Trump's lies while he dodges accountability. His marriage is a joke. His leadership is a disaster, and you're too blind to see it. His words were a desperate swing, an attempt to reclaim dominance by dragging Trump back into the fray. But Leavitt was ready, her response a verbal grenade. You keep harping on his marriage because you've got nothing else. Melania's stronger than you'll ever be, and so is he. You're not exposing Trump. You're exposing yourself, Howard, as a man who's scared of losing his grip on a world that's moving on. The studio shook with applause, Stern's face a mask of rage as her words landed like blows. The confrontation spiraled into chaos, each exchange a high-stakes gamble. Stern tried to pivot, accusing Leavitt of dodging policy questions, of being a Trump clone with no original thoughts. You're just reading his script, he sneered, his voice hoarse. Leavitt countered with a blistering takedown, pointing out Stern's own reliance on controversy to stay relevant. I answer to the American people, Howard. Who do you answer to? Your ego? The crowd roared, her youth and clarity turning Stern's attacks into liabilities. Hannity, struggling to maintain order, tossed in a question about media trust. But it was futile. The two were locked in a duel. The studio their arena. Stern's frustration was palpable, his usual swagger replaced by raw anger as Leavitt matched his every move. He leaned forward, his voice trembling with intensity. You think you're untouchable? You're a fad, Karoline, and fads fade. Trump's a sinking ship, and you're going down with him. The crowd gasped, sensing the desperation in his tone. Leavitt didn't flinch, her response a masterstroke. If I'm a fad, Howard, why are you so afraid of me? You're shouting, because you know the truth. I'm not fading, but you are. The audience erupted, Stern's eyes widening as her words hit their mark, his hands shaking as he gripped the table, the weight of her defiance threatening to break him. The Fox News studio was a cauldron of chaos, the audience's roar still echoing as Karoline Leavitt's words hung like a guillotine over Howard Stern. His face was a storm of fury and disbelief, his hands trembling as he clutched the table, caught in the glare of her unyielding defiance. Sean Hannity, his eyes gleaming with the spectacle, leaned in, voice sharp. Karoline, Howard says you're a fad tied to Trump's fate. Howard, you're saying she's irrelevant. Let's finish. Where do you both stand? The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion in a confrontation that had become a cultural flashpoint. Leavitt's gaze never left Stern, her voice calm but razor-edged. Howard, you call me a fad because you can't stand that I'm here, speaking for millions who see through your noise. You're not fighting for truth. You're fighting for relevance, and you're losing. The crowd erupted, her words a rallying cry that shook the room. She leaned forward, her tone fierce. I stand for a movement, for people who believe in strength, in loyalty, in a future you've never understood. You stand for nothing but your own voice, and it's getting weaker every second. The applause was deafening, a wave of support that seemed to physically push Stern back in his chair. Stern's face twisted, his voice a raw shout as he fought to reclaim control. You're a fool, Karoline. You think Trump's your savior? He's a con man, a fraud who's made a mockery of this country, and you're his lapdog, too naive to see he's using you. His words were desperate, a final attempt to wound, to drag her down with his venom. The audience split, boos clashing with cheers, but Stern pressed on, his voice cracking. You're not a movement. You're a mistake. A kid who'll be forgotten when Trump's empire collapses. And it will collapse. His hands slammed the table, his eyes wild, but the room sensed his unraveling, his attacks losing their sting against Leavitt's iron resolve. Leavitt's response was a masterclass in control, her voice rising with quiet power. You're wrong, Howard, and deep down, you know it. President Trump's fighting for America, and so am I. You call me naive? I call you scared. Scared of a world where your cynicism doesn't rule, where people like me and the millions behind me are shaping the future." The crowd roared, her words a beacon for her supporters. She leaned closer, her eyes burning. "You've spent your life tearing down what others build. I'm building something, Howard, and no amount of your rage can stop it." The studio shook, Hannity barely able to contain the chaos as Leavitt's defiance lit a fire in the room. Stern, his face flushed, tried to interrupt, but Leavitt powered through, her voice a crescendo. "You attacked Trump's marriage, his leadership, me, because you've got nothing left. The American people see it, Howard. They see your anger, your fear, and they're choosing hope over your hate." The audience was on its feet, the sound overwhelming as Stern's expression crumbled, his usual bravado replaced by a stunned silence. Hannity, sensing the shift, tried to pivot to policy, but it was too late. The battle was personal, and Leavitt was winning. Stern's final stand was a desperate lunge. "You're a nobody, Karoline. A nobody who'll fade when Trump does." His voice was hoarse, his hands shaking as he pointed at her. But Leavitt was unshakable, her response a knockout blow. "If I'm a nobody, Howard, why can't you stop talking about me? You're not fighting me. You're fighting the future, and you've already lost." The crowd exploded, the sound drowning out Stern's attempt to retort. His face was a mask of defeat, his eyes darting to the cameras, then to Hannity, realizing the narrative had slipped from his grasp. The studio was electric, the tension unbearable as Leavitt sat back, her expression serene but triumphant. Stern, unable to take the humiliation, ripped off his microphone, his chair scraping loudly as he stood. "I'm done with this circus," he bellowed, storming off the set, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. The audience gasped, then erupted in cheers for Leavitt, who remained composed, her victory undeniable. Hannity, scrambling to wrap up, praised her poise, but the moment belonged to her alone. The cameras lingered on her, a 27-year-old who'd just dismantled a legend, her calm strength a symbol of a new era. As the segment ended, the studio buzzed with the weight of what had transpired. Leavitt's triumph was more than a debate win. It was a seismic shift, a moment where a young voice had outshone a fading icon. Stern's exit, fueled by rage and defeat, marked the end of his dominance in the clash, while Leavitt emerged as a force, her words already sparking a firestorm online. The confrontation was over, but its echo would reshape the political landscape, proving that in the arena of ideas, conviction could topple even the loudest giants.